After the Western Roman Empire decided to spontaneously disassemble itself around 476 AD, Europe entered a phase that historians politely call the Early Middle Ages. Think of it as a continent-wide system reboot, except they forgot to back up any of the data. Literacy became a niche hobby, mostly for people in robes who had a lot of time on their hands. Libraries, those wonderful buildings full of flammable ideas, were mostly gone. The Great Library of Alexandria hadn't been a single bonfire, but a slow, sad fizzle over centuries. What was left in Europe were a few scattered monasteries where monks spent their days meticulously copying the Bible and occasionally a heavily edited summary of a book about Roman farming techniques. It was less a dark age and more of an age of very limited reading material. While Europe was rediscovering the joys of subsistence farming, a new world power was rising in the East. The Abbasid Caliphate, established in 750 AD, wasn't just about conquest. It was about hoarding knowledge on an industrial scale. They moved their capital to a brand new, perfectly circular city called Baghdad. It was the Silicon Valley of the 9th century, but with more camels. The caliphs, particularly one named Al-Mamun, were obsessed with gathering all the world's books. Legend says Aristotle appeared to him in a dream and told him to go find his books, which is a much cooler origin story than "we found some old scrolls in a pot." This obsession led to the founding of the Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, which was less a library and more a government-funded super collider for ideas. So, how do you get Greek texts when you're in Baghdad? You go on a shopping spree. The Abbasids sent agents to the Byzantine Empire and beyond, hunting for manuscripts by Plato, Aristotle, Galen, and Ptolemy. They didn't just grab them, they created a systematic, state-sponsored translation movement. Scholars, many of them Nestorian Christians who knew both Greek and Arabic, were hired for the job. A physician named Hunayn ibn Ishaq was a superstar. He translated 129 of Galen's medical works into Arabic. And these guys got paid. The story goes that Al-Mamun paid translators the weight of their translated books in solid gold. Suddenly, being a massive nerd was the most lucrative profession you could have. Imagine that! It's easy to think these scholars were just glorified librarians saving books from oblivion. But they weren't just saving knowledge, they were building on it. They read Aristotle and wrote thousands of pages of commentary, arguing with him, testing his ideas. They took Greek geometry, blended it with numerals they got from India, including the concept of zero, which is kind of important, and invented algebra. The very word algebra comes from the title of a book by al-Khwarizmi, Kitab al-Jabr. A guy named Ibn al-Haytham, or Alhazen in Latin, basically invented the scientific method. He used experiments to prove that we see because light enters our eyes, not because our eyes shoot out laser beams. A deeply disappointing discovery for everyone, I'm sure, but a crucial one for the field of optics. Nowhere was this innovation clearer than in medicine. While European medical practice consisted mainly of bloodletting and sternly worded prayers, doctors in Baghdad and Cairo were developing actual, medicine. Al-Razi was the first physician to clinically distinguish between smallpox and measles, which is helpful if you want to not die from the wrong disease. He also wrote a 23-volume encyclopedia of medicine, a light read. Then there was Ibn Sina, or Avicenna, a Persian polymath who was basically a real-life Tony Stark. His book, The Canon of Medicine, was so comprehensive, so systematic, it became the standard medical textbook in Europe for the next 600 years. So, for longer than the Ottoman Empire existed, European doctors were learning their trade from a 1,000-year-old book written in Arabic and translated into Latin. The knowledge didn't just sit in Baghdad. It spread across the Islamic world, most importantly to the other side of the Mediterranean, to Al-Andalus, what we now call Spain and Portugal. While Paris and London were muddy towns with a few thousand people, the city of Córdoba was a metropolis of 500,000. It had paved streets, streetlights, and a library that allegedly held 400,000 books. To put that in perspective, the biggest monastery library in Christian Europe at the time probably had about 400. That's not a typo. This was the home of thinkers like Ibn Rushd or Averroes. He wrote such detailed and brilliant commentaries on Aristotle that when Europeans finally got curious about the Old Greek again, they often read Aristotle through Averroes. He was the official guide, the Cliff's Notes, and the DLC all rolled into one. So, how did this knowledge finally make the jump back into Europe? War, mostly, as Christian kingdoms began the centuries-long reconquista of Spain. They captured cities like Toledo in 1085. And inside, they found intellectual jackpots. Instead of burning everything, which would have been the more traditional approach, Archbishop Raymond of Toledo established a translation school. Scholars from all over Europe flocked to Toledo to get their hands on this stuff. A notable workaholic was Jared of Cremona, an Italian who reportedly learned Arabic specifically so he could read Ptolemy's Almagest, the definitive book on astronomy. He then spent the rest of his life translating. He personally translated at least 71 major books from Arabic to Latin, covering everything from philosophy to medicine to, of course, algebra. The man was a one-person knowledge transfer program. Fast forward a couple of centuries and you get the Italian Renaissance, this grand rebirth of Europe, this rediscovery of classical Greek and Roman wisdom. It's a great story, except they usually leave out the part where the knowledge arrived with an Arabic accent. The humanism, the science, the philosophy that fueled the Renaissance was built squarely on the foundation laid by the Toledo translators. When people like Thomas Aquinas decided to merge Christian theology with Aristotelian logic, whose version of Aristotle were they using? The one commented on by Averroes? It's like claiming you discovered a band, but you only heard their songs from a cover band's album that you bought in a different country. The entire intellectual reawakening of Europe was, in many ways, an echo of a conversation that had been happening in Arabic for 400 years. Let's talk about the physical medium for a second. Books. In Europe, they were written on parchment, which is scraped and treated animal skin. It's durable, it's fancy, and it is ridiculously expensive. Making one large Bible required the skins of about 200 sheep. Meanwhile, the Islamic world had learned a secret from Chinese prisoners captured at the Battle of Talas in 751: how to make paper. Paper was cheap. It was easy to produce. You could make a book without bankrupting a small town. The first paper mills in the Islamic world appeared in Baghdad in the 8th century. The first one in Christian Europe? Spain in the 11th century, and Italy in the 13th. You can't have a widespread revival of learning when the price of a single book is a flock of livestock. The spread of paper was the unsung hero of this whole story. And finally, the numbers. The Romans gave Europe a numerical system that was, to be blunt, awful. Quick, what's MCDXV7 divided by CCXI? It's a nightmare. Doing any kind of serious commerce, engineering, or science with Roman numerals is like trying to build a spaceship with stone tools. The Islamic world, however, had adopted and refined a system from India that included a revolutionary piece of tech: the number 0. These are the numerals we use today. They were introduced to the West primarily through the work of Al-Khwarizmi. Yes, him again, and Al-Kindi. An Italian merchant named Fibonacci picked them up on his travels in North Africa and wrote a book in 1202 called Liber Abaci that explained to Europeans how to use this amazing new system for, actually calculating things. It took a couple of centuries to catch on, because tradition, but it was arguably one of the most important software updates Europe ever installed. So, if the evidence is this overwhelming, why isn't this the standard story? Why is it, Rome fell, it was dark, then we found some Greek statues and invented the Renaissance? Well, history is written by the winners, but it's edited by everyone with an agenda. As Europe entered a long period of conflict with the Ottoman Empire, playing up the intellectual debt to the Islamic world wasn't great for morale. Later, Enlightenment thinkers wanted a clean break from the superstitious medieval past. A story of direct inheritance from enlightened Greece and Rome sounded much better than inheritance via the religious civilization we've been fighting for 500 years. It's a classic case of conveniently forgetting the middleman, a rebranding effort that was, you have to admit, wildly successful. Ultimately, the story isn't that one civilization was smarter than another, it's that knowledge is a relay race, not a solo marathon. The Greeks started a leg, the Romans dropped the baton, the Islamic world picked it up and ran with it for a long way, adding their own speed and style. Then they passed it back to a Europe that was finally ready to start running again. Every major leap forward is built on the work of someone else, often someone who looked, spoke, and prayed differently than you. Forgetting that isn't just bad history, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of how progress actually works. It's a messy, interconnected, and often deeply ironic process. And humans have always been great at taking credit for the final lap while forgetting who ran the first 3. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!